Hi, and thanks for tuning into Street Life. I'm Natasha, and this is an intro preview, really, of my new series, Rolling with RAQ, where I'll be recapping and reviewing Power Book 3, Raising Kanan. While Kanan is the star of the show, I've titled my series Rolling with RAQ because Kanan's mom, the character Raquel "RAQ" Thomas, as portrayed by Patina Miller, is everything. Kanan Stark was an adult character in the original Power series and was portrayed by 50 Cent. He was a vicious criminal willing to do unimaginable things to achieve his goals. When the series begins, Kanan, played by Makai Curtis, is a fairly normal 15-year-old boy growing up in South Jamaica, Queens, New York. This is an origin story of sorts, as the show follows Kanan as he matures and transforms into the villain of the later series. A key factor in Kanan's development is that his mom, Raquel "RAQ" Thomas, played by Patina Miller, isn't your average mom. She's actually the head of a growing drug business operated by her and her brothers. As the premiere of the second season nears, I've decided to recap and discuss each episode from the first season. I'll be dropping a new episode every day from now until the season premiere. Check them out, check the show out if you haven't already, and let me know what you think. But in this episode, I'm going to give you an overview of why I think the show is worth checking out and what to expect. Let me start by saying that I didn't start watching Power Book 3 Raising Kanan until a year after it came out. The show premiered in July of 2021, but I didn't start watching the show until June of 2022. I received an offer from Starz and Showtime on RAQ for like $1 a month for each channel, but I found a few things to check out on Showtime, but also nothing on Starz, until I saw the listing for Raising Kanan. To be honest, I had very low expectations and assumed it would be on par with like those terrible straight-to-video movies, bad acting, terrible storylines, dry weaves, and general dustiness all around. When I tell you I was wrong, I was immediately drawn to the show the moment it began because it was clear that this was something different. I had plans for the day, a list of things to get done. All of that went out the window. I completely changed my day around and binge watched one episode after another. I watched most of the season that first day, and another day of plans were pushed aside so I could finish watching the following day. To say that I was hooked is an understatement. The season was done, and I immediately wanted to see what happened next. From the beginning, I was into the overall story and the characters, but Raquel "RAQ" Thomas is the show for me. She pulled me into the show, and I was riding with her from jump. At first, I had no idea who the actress playing RAQ was, so I hit up Google to learn more about Patina Miller. I watched at least some of the first season of Madam Secretary and recognized her as like the one random black lady that was on the show. Like she was just in background somewhere. I never paid her any mind because I disliked the way the character was presented, though I only watched like a few episodes, so that might have changed in later seasons. And while the Hunger Games were a big thing a few years ago, I still haven't gotten around to seeing any of them. I did watch The Many Saints of Newark last year, and while she was in the film, I don't recall her character, but like that movie overall was a disappointment. But here, I sat up and took notice of Patina Miller. She shines in the role. And if anything, it shows that there are a lot of talented black actors and actresses who really just need more opportunities. I'm loving Patina Miller as RAQ, but seeing interviews of her as herself, you realize how very different they are. She transforms into this character and is bodying the role. Miller is very bubbly, for lack of a better term, in interviews, so it's like, I can believe that she's from the South. Meanwhile, RAQ is very New York City grown up around the way girl, if that makes sense. RAQ is not randomly smiling walking down the street, but Miller looks like the type, like maybe she might, skip down the street smiling while telling everyone good morning. I want Miller to stick around as RAQ for at least a few more seasons, but I'd also like to see her in other roles. She's now officially added to my list of actresses that I check for and will support whenever possible. I know she returned to Broadway over the summer, but I'm curious to see what she does next. Hopefully more film and TV roles that allow her to show her talent and range are in her future. I'd watched the previous Power series, but eventually disliked both of them. I watched the original Power series in real time for the first few seasons, but maybe by the third or so, it began to feel very repetitive. I got tired of the love triangle storyline between Ghost, Tasha, and Angela because I don't have patience with television romances that go back and forth for no good reason. Ghost and Tommy having issues or a contentious relationship with their connect each season also began to feel repetitious. And once Tariq and his twin became involved in the main storyline, it felt beyond ridiculous. I prefer complex but realistic characters and storylines over like shootouts every other episode. Things don't have to explode. By the later seasons, I was just kind of watching episodes whenever I got around to them, and I was over it by the last season. I like characters that are smart and strategic thinkers, but it becomes boring when they're smart because everyone else is seemingly stupid. The characters felt flat as they didn't grow or develop over the course of the show, and I just didn't buy Tariq's storyline. I still tried to give Power Book 2 a chance, but it just didn't grab me as there were too many people, the storylines were uninteresting, and some of the acting just wasn't very good. Raising Kanan caught me off guard because I had really low expectations after the previous series. First, the acting is good across the board, and especially for the main characters. Even for the characters that I don't necessarily like, it's not because the actor or actress is doing a bad job. The storylines, at least thus far, are better. The characters are more fleshed out, and they feel like they could be real people. In the original series, I didn't care about Kanan at all. And that played a part in me initially passing on this show. Like, I really didn't care about his childhood or, who he was before. Kanan was supposed to be a cold-hearted and ruthless adversary to Ghost, but he felt like a cartoon villain, as he was just portrayed as evil with no complexity or nuance to his character. But they made some really smart decisions with how they chose to approach the characters in this series, Kanan being one of the main ones. Part of that might be the result of this series having a different creator and showrunner. Courtney Kemp seems to have been more involved with the first 2 books, and I think her style just isn't for me. This series is helmed by Sasha Penn, and maybe that change in leadership explains the difference in the feel of this series. What I really enjoyed was the time devoted to explaining the characters and their motivations. They're taking more time to develop the characters, so like you care about and feel vested in them. We know Kanan and Jukebox as adults from the original series, and they're completely different from who they are as teens in this series. We knew little to nothing about the rest of Kanan's family in the original series, but are introduced to them here. This makes you question what happened to turn Jukebox and Kanan into the monsters they became. And upon meeting RAQ and the rest of the crew, what happened to make them who they are? And why are they seemingly not around by the time we met Kanan and Jukebox as adults? We first see Kanan as a cute, chubby little kid around the age of 10, and RAQ is a young mom in her 20s. But the bulk of the show is really about Kanan as a teen, and by that point, RAQ is in her early 30s. I want to say she's like 31. Kanan is a regular teenage kid, and if anything, he actually feels a little bit sheltered. He's aware that his mom is involved in the drug trade, but she tries to keep him away from that side of her life. Kanan is decked out from head to toe in name brand clothing and has all the latest Jordans, Nikes, Timberlands, etc. He doesn't have a job, so obviously his mother's either buying this stuff or giving him the money to buy these clothes. Their house isn't super fancy, but it looks comfortable and he has his own room. He might not have his father in the picture, but his mom is certainly taking care of him with regards to food, clothing, and shelter. Not to mention that his mom dotes on him. In turn, Kanan loves RAQ, as well as his cousin, Laverne, aka Jukebox, played by Haley Kilgore. He also has his main group of friends from the neighborhood, which consists of Famous and D-Wiz. As with most teens this age, there's also a love interest. In this case, Davina, who he's known and liked since they were very small children. You can't help but to wonder, how does this kid go from being a seemingly nice kid to becoming the mess of a man that is Kanan in the original Power? Sure, his mom and her brothers are selling drugs, but at this point, RAQ isn't doing a bad job with him. When he's out of pocket, she corrects him and reminds him to mind his manners. She's tried to teach him to cook, clean, and otherwise take care of himself. RAQ is provided for and taking care of Kanan, but she's also trying to prepare him for when the time comes and he's on his own, either because he's an adult or because she's no longer there. She doesn't let him run wild or do whatever he wants. She tries to offer some kind of guidance, and at least at the start of the show, there's your typical mother and son relationship. RAQ doesn't treat him like her friend, but rather as her child. But by the time the original Power begins and Kanan is an adult, RAQ is seemingly nowhere around. He mentions going to see his mom, but by the time he dies, he's already killed Jukebox, and it's reported that he has no surviving relatives. No one shows up to claim his body. It's been consistent that Kanan grew up without his father in his life, yet here he has not only his mother, but also at least 2 uncles and his grandmother. Granted, by the time he became an adult, his grandmother could have just been old and died from natural causes, so let's put her aside. But what happened to the rest of his family? Is his mom still around, but they're estranged, or is she dead or in jail? More than following the story of Kanan, I got wrapped up in wondering what is going to happen to RAQ. In this look back, we see that his mom is very much alive, but there's a sense that she might be living on borrowed time. Jukebox is also still relatively normal at this point, but despite being only a year older, she's more on the ball than Kanan. Part of this is that Jukebox seems less sheltered than Kanan. She's like the reverse of his situation, as her mother isn't around and she's being raised by her dad, who's somewhat distant and neglectful. Jukebox grows into a person that Kanan, Ghost, and Tommy respect, if not fear. RAQ, along with her younger brother Lulu, played by Malcolm Mays, and older brother Marvin, played by London Brown, are already adults by the time we meet them. RAQ is a surprisingly complex and multifaceted character, and as one of the show's main characters, we see more parts of her life. The brothers also have their own quirks and personalities, but we also get bits of their backstories as the season unfolds. I couldn't help but wonder what happened to this trio of siblings that set them down this path and shaped them into these characters. I didn't have any of those kinds of questions while watching the original Power. They haven't completely reinvented the wheel here, but the story and characters are still interesting. There have been movies and TV shows about drug dealers, the same for Black women who are single moms and Black teen males growing up without their fathers, but the way that it's presented here is actually quite refreshing. Quite often when you have stories about drug dealers or any of those other categories, it's the same thing over and over, and there's no real complexity. In place of story, dialogue, and character development, there's just violence and machismo. Taking the opposite approach is one of the things that I really liked about Raising Kanan. We see that Kanan didn't enter the world with guns blazing, but was a scared teen at first, or a normal teen, I should say, and he was actually bullied as a kid. As a Black woman watching this Black woman on TV, I certainly don't want her life. I don't know any female drug dealers, right, or anyone living this kind of life. But I like that she's a Black woman who's certainly imperfect, but also complex. Quite often, Black women, Black people really, are portrayed as just flat, stereotypical characters, whether they're criminals or paragons of virtue. Sure, RAQ was a teenage mom from South Jamaica, Queens, Southside, and that could have been a completely different storyline. Instead, here, she's a tough and ambitious drug queenpin. Yes, she's selling drugs, but let's put aside the moral issues because this is a work of fiction. RAQ is the leader of this growing drug enterprise where out in the world, she's smart, strategic, tough, a leader. Not everyone might know her by sight, but most know her by reputation. Out in the street, she's a little bit cold, as you rarely see her genuinely smile or laugh. That's understandable, as when selling drugs, you can only trust the people you deal with to a point. The relationship and her personality are a bit different with her brothers because they work together. Sure, they have their relationships as siblings where she cares about them and they care about her, but the nature of their illegal and deadly business affects their relationship. It impacts the way that she interacts with them and they with her. They might be siblings, but in the context of their business, she's also their boss. She makes this especially clear with Marvin, as there's some tension between the two of them. He's constantly trying to prove himself to her, but typically messes up in the process. Marvin usually has good intentions, but tends to just make things worse and constantly disappoints RAQ. Lulu, despite being younger, is more dependable, so RAQ relies on him more. He's her right-hand man. RAQ's clear preference for him affects the relationship between Marvin and Lou. There's an uneasiness between the three of them because of this business. Yet while they might clash at times and fight with each other, you get the sense that they'll back each other against any threats from the outside because they're still family. Yet RAQ is different when she's at home with Kanan or even Jukebox. She's warm and extremely affectionate towards them both. RAQ hugs Kanan, tells him that she loves him, and encourages him. She wants good things for Kanan and a life far different from the one that she's living. RAQ accepts that she is risking her life selling drugs. In her eyes, it's worth the risk if it means that Kanan will have a chance to leave this neighborhood behind and go on to live a good life that's safe and happy. These are things that any decent parent would want for their child, that their child would have more and be more in life than they had for themselves. We see the sacrifices that she's making. RAQ is putting her life on the line to provide Kanan with opportunities that it sounds like she probably wishes she had for herself. Having missed out on these things, RAQ wants to give them to Kanan. And then you see her with Jukebox, with whom she's arguably even more open and affectionate. We come to find out that at one point she was raising both of them. And keep in mind that Raquel had Kanan when she was a teenager, so she would have likely been anywhere from her teens to her 20s raising her son and her niece. She and Jukebox still have a good relationship when the show opens, but it seems like they were even closer in the past. Jukebox's mom isn't around. Marvin spent some time in prison, and while he's home now, the two still aren't very close. At one point, RAQ functioned as Jukebox's mom, right, like default mom, and Lulu still serves as her quasi-dad. Marvin is doing his own thing, and there just seems to be a disconnect between him and his daughter. He might have played a part in conceiving Jukebox, but he's not really in the mix, or at least not to the extent that he should be when it comes to her development as a person. Yet there's a definite warmth between Lou and Jukebox. Lulu also cares about Kanan, but we never really see the two interact one-on-one, at least not in the first season. It's worth noting because Lulu is a fairly constant presence around RAQ, but we never see him alone with Kanan. It's obvious that RAQ loves Kanan, as that's her baby, but she also loves Jukebox. Maybe because they're females, there are conversations that RAQ has with Jukebox that she doesn't seem to have with Kanan. She's more open with Jukebox about personal topics such as relationships and romance that she doesn't talk about with Kanan, or at least we don't see it. She hugs both of them, tells Kanan that she loves him, and most importantly, she's openly proud of their individual merits and encourages them to use their abilities to strive for more. I like that RAQ has different facets to a character because that's how most people are. I don't care how bad you are, unless you're an absolute sociopath, there was probably somebody at some point in your life that you loved and cared about or felt some degree of warmth towards. And likewise, there's probably at least one person that you just could not stand. If someone were to ask those people to describe you as a person, they might give vastly different descriptions. There are things in life that make you happy as well as things that make you sad. I don't care how tough you are, at some point as a kid and even as an adult, you've cried or felt some kind of feeling beyond anger because people have emotions. You generally don't feel the same way all the time. Depending on where you are and what's happening, you probably adjust your demeanor accordingly. But quite often, that's not portrayed in TV shows and movies. Characters are often portrayed the same way all the time, which creates that flatness and lack of complexity that makes them feel one-dimensional. Out in the world, RAQ is this boss lady queenpin persona. Looking at her interactions with her rival Unique or even her soldier Scrappy, it's likely that neither of them know her personally or that side of her. They're not hanging out at her house and don't know what she's like at home. There's no need for them to know that side of her, as they just need to know her within the context of which they interact with each other in the drug business. But then you see her at home with Kanan or Jukebox, and she's typically warm and motherly towards them. Why? Because there's a time and place for everything, and the street is not the time or place for all of that. She bumps heads with her brothers, but if something happens to one of them, she would care and be concerned. When Marvin messes up and creates problems for her, she becomes upset with him, and you can see their hurt feelings on both sides. Then there's her love interest, the cutie patootie that is Symphony Bosket, played by Toby Sandman. We don't learn much about his backstory, but thus far, Symphony is the perfect combination of cutie with a body and a brain. He's cute, which would attract most women, but he's also kind of nerdy. At first glance, you wouldn't think that RAQ would be into him, but I totally get his appeal, as he's sweet, open about his feelings, and seemingly genuine. He's refreshing in this group of manipulative people who are always scheming. I was rolling with RAQ on him. I also grew to like Symphony randomly dropping knowledge. Who would have thought urban planning and the history of concrete could be so fascinating? RAQ is also tender and affectionate with him, but obviously in a different way from Kanan or Jukebox. With Symphony, you see her be sweet and tender, but also sexy. We get to see yet another side of her character because she's intimate with him in a romantic rather than maternal or familial way. More on this in later episodes, but she also frustrates me with the way she speaks to him at times. He's the only character who at some points has me not rolling with RAQ. Throwing her seemingly problematic mother, and we see RAQ as mother, sister, aunt, daughter, girlfriend, lover, boss. The only dynamic that's missing is friends because she doesn't seem to have any personal friends. And then there's also the aspect of her being a woman in a male-dominated environment. The actress Patina Miller seems to be of average height, not too tall, not too short, and she's very slim. They dress her in a lot of heels, so in the end, she ends up being at eye level with many of the male characters, but she's noticeably physically smaller than most of them. Though her height in comparison to Kanan sometimes appears off, and she looks huge standing next to him in some scenes, but is about the same height in others. Sometimes having characters show a little bit of vulnerability, or them not being perfect, or not having all the answers and being scared, at times makes them more interesting. Selling drugs is a dangerous trade, and there's some vulnerability because it's obvious from the very beginning that she might be running things, but can be moved aside just like anybody else out there, and so can her son Kanan. She admits that fear to Kanan, and you can see the stress in her life as she chain smokes like nobody's business. But from that fear and tension comes the willingness to make really tough choices. There's fear and vulnerability within her, but you also see fear and vulnerability within the other characters as well. Rather than being perfect superheroes or supervillains, they're flawed humans, and that draws you into the characters. You see them out in the street where if need be they're violent, ruthless even, but that's a persona, or rather, not a persona, but it's part of who they are, but not the entirety. It's like who you are when you're at work is different from who you are when you're with your friends, kids, significant other, etc. I would hope that you don't speak to your coworkers on the same intimate level that you might with your boyfriend or girlfriend. The conversation that you have with your significant other is different from the type of conversations you have with your kids. You might be affectionate in both situations, but the way that you express that affection is different. Those varied facets of the characters and their vulnerabilities, which were apparent from the beginning, are engrossing. It's not like when you watch action movies and the star walks into a room of 50 people, beats them all up, and walks out unscathed. They don't take any losses and just win all the time. Those are shows or films you watch for the action and special effects, like seeing fighting, explosions, but not necessarily for the story or to see how the characters develop. RAQ and Kanan are the leads of this show, but they both take losses and make mistakes. In the very first episode, Kanan's life is in danger because of a mistake he makes, and there's an ominous feeling that something might happen to RAQ. That makes the story incredibly interesting because you tune in to find out what's going to happen next. Given the original power, Kanan is in no danger of dying at this point, but he can be seriously injured. But now there's RAQ, Lou, Marvin, Symphony, Unique, and a bunch of other characters to worry about. Who's going to get hurt or die? Will any of them escape to better lives by the end? I really want RAQ to leave this life and run away with Symphony. I just thought I'd drop that in there. Unique, played by Joey Badass, is RAQ's rival in the local drug trade, so while I don't want him to win against her, I also don't want anything too bad to happen to him. For the most part, I like just about everyone and care what happens to them. Everybody, that is, except for Detective Howard, played by Omar Epps, who I don't like and wish nothing but bad upon him. Nothing against Omar Epps, but I disliked Howard the moment he appeared on screen. It is what it is. I tend to have a healthy level of skepticism about shows and movies that are very popular in the mainstream. That's not to say that I won't check them out for myself, but I try not to get my hopes up as I've been disappointed in the past. With this show, I've watched it and discussed it with several other people, and everyone has enjoyed it. Maybe not to the level that I have, but they liked it as well, with RAQ in particular being a crowd favorite. I'd initially banned my mom from watching the show, given RAQ and the rest of the crew's carnal shenanigans. But when I finally relented and allowed my mom to watch, she got caught up in the story and was upset when she reached the end of the first season. I recommended the show to a coworker, and she's now just as fanatical and will be my watch buddy when the second season starts. At this point, I should probably be getting a check for the way I've been promoting Raising Kanan to everyone that I know. But being serious, that's part of why I decided to start making these recaps and reviews. Raising Kanan is a good show that doesn't seem to be getting the attention that it deserves. I'm looking forward to the second season and hope that they'll maintain the quality and continue building on what they've done so far. There have been a few shows that are great the first season, as they spend time setting up the characters only to have the show fall apart in the second and third season. I think the reason is that shows seem to be renewed on a season-by-season basis. It can be quite a hurdle for a show to get from pilot to production and then to get picked up for the first season. Thus, the showrunners and creators put a lot of effort into making sure that the first season is good enough that it increases the odds of its success and being renewed. But because they're working on a season-by-season basis, they might not be thinking like 3 or 4 seasons down the line, and putting in place plans for the show to maintain consistency from premiere through finale. Raising Kanan was renewed for a second season before the first season had even premiered, which speaks to the network's confidence in the show. But Power is also like the franchise series on Starz, as there are like a few other popular shows, but nothing really major. As I was writing the notes for this episode, I saw on Patina Miller's IG account that they're starting to do press, and this was like a few days after the second trailer premiered. I don't watch regular TV, so my perspective might be skewed, but speaking to other people who watched the show, they had no idea that it was getting ready to come back. So while part of the show's lack of attention might be due to mainstream media ignoring so-called black shows, Stark could also do a better job of promoting the show. There was at least a month or two between the trailers for the second season, but there should have been drops and clips on social media along the way. And now at 2 weeks out, the cast should be everywhere doing interviews, get people amped for the show's return, and make even people who watched last year want to go back and watch it again so it's fresh in their mind. This is a show about hustlers, so the people at Starz need to follow suit and get on their grind. Whatever happens, I'm still rolling with RAQ. It seems the plan is to eventually kill or otherwise move her aside so Kanan can continue on his journey to becoming a monster. Patina Miller has done almost too good a job for them to easily get her out of there. I've watched other reviews and comments, and I know some people are impatient to have Kanan meet like Breeze, Ghost, and Tommy. But in my eyes, I haven't had enough of RAQ and the Thomas boys, so those other three, they can stay where they are. Honestly, I really don't care about Ghost or Tommy appearing on this show. Like, they can leave them out. I just hope that in the move to eventually shift focus to Kanan, that the showrunners don't try to turn the audience against RAQ by having her go completely off the rails. I like the facets of RAQ's personality, like her character, and understand if future experiences change her somewhat, but hopefully not into a completely different character, like one that I don't like. I almost don't even like that the complex Kanan we have in this show is like destined to become the caricature of a villain shown in the original Power. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to check back tomorrow and every day after that as I recap episodes leading up to Raising Kanan's Season 2 premiere on August 14th. To ensure you don't miss any episodes, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and check out my Rolling with RAQ playlist. Go ahead and click that thumbs up button if you like what you saw, and go ahead and share this episode on social media. More importantly, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Are you rolling with RAQ or someone else?